The North Atlantic in midwinter was not the sort of place you expected to find human life, much less human remains. The water was black, restless, and full of the kind of cold that could stop a man's heart in minutes. Even in calm seas, the Arctic was a graveyard of wrecks and frozen ambitions, a place where lost ships slept in the silence of deep water. Dr. Marcus Hale had spent 20 years mapping that graveyard as a marine archaeologist. He dived on everything from medieval longships to World War II destroyers. But nothing quite like the wreck that lay before him, now its dark silhouette emerging from the gloom of the seabed, like some dormant steel predator. It was the USS Nereus, a United States Navy submarine that had vanished without trace in February 1952 during a Cold War patrol near the Greenland-Iceland Gap. At the time, it was assumed to have been lost in a catastrophic accident, either a battery explosion or a hull breach caused by ice. No wreckage had ever been found, no bodies recovered. Officially, the incident was closed after a year. The Navy listed all 89 crew as missing, presumed dead, and their families were handed folded flags and condolences. But the Nereus had become a myth in Cold War naval circles, whispered about in mess halls and veterans' reunions, because, according to some, her captain had been carrying something the Soviets would have killed to get their hands on. Now, 73 years later, Marcus was the first person to see her again. The submarine lay on her starboard side, the hull intact except for a jagged tear just forward of the sail. The metal edges were twisted outward, not inward, a detail that sent a ripple of unease through him. Explosions inside a submarine almost always tore metal inward. This was something else. His dive partner, Commander Aisha Wren, moved into view, her flashlight beam sweeping across the hull markings. The white stencil of SS-414 was still faintly visible beneath decades of silt and barnacle growth. Her voice crackled over the comms. "Marcus, you seeing this?" He followed her, beamed toward the tier. Wedged in the twisted plating, half buried in silt, was something that had no business being there, a fragment of metal with Cyrillic letters, stenciled in black paint. Marcus felt his throat tighten. The Nereus had gone missing at the height of the Korean War, when US and Soviet submarines played a deadly cat-and-mouse game beneath the Arctic ice. But the presence of Soviet debris inside the hull suggested the official story was a lie. Wren's voice came again, quieter now. "That's not the only thing. Look at the forward hatch." Marcus finned around the sail. The forward escape trunk was sealed from the outside, welded shut, with thick, uneven seams, as if someone had intentionally trapped the crew inside. He didn't say anything at first. The black water pressed close, and the sound of his own breathing seemed suddenly too loud. "Why would someone seal a hatch from the outside?" Wren asked. "Because they didn't want anyone getting out," Marcus said finally. "Or something getting out." They had only 20 minutes of bottom time left before the cold began to risk hypothermia, but Marcus made a snap decision. "We're going inside." Wren hesitated. "Without the ROV sweep. We'll keep to the forward compartments. Just a quick look." Inside, the darkness was absolute. Their helmet lights revealed peeling paint, floating scraps of paper, and the eerie stillness of a place that had been untouched since the day it died. In the control room, rusted dials and shattered glass told a story of sudden violence. But the strangest thing was the bodies. They weren't floating, as you might expect. They were seated, strapped into their stations as if still at their posts. Their faces were pale wax, preserved by the cold, their eyes frozen open. Wren's voice shook. "Marcus, they're all looking the same way." He saw it too. Every single one of them was facing the aft bulkhead, toward a closed compartment door. Some of them had their hands still outstretched toward it. Marcus moved closer. The metal around the doorframe was scorched. A small brass plate read, "Restricted, authorized personnel only." Wren floated beside him, her light playing over the locking mechanism. "What's in there?" Marcus was about to answer when he saw the symbol half hidden under the scorch. Mark's stenciled trident, and the words, Project Erebus. He'd heard that name before, once, in a classified archive, buried in a footnote about unsanctioned deep-water operations. The file had been empty, except for a single line. See Department of Naval Intelligence, eyes only. Ren's breathing had gone shallow. Marcus, we need to go. He glanced at his pressure gauge. 10 minutes left. He should have agreed, but instead, he reached for the latch. The door didn't move, and then through the steel, through 70 years of silence, something knocked back. For a moment, Marcus thought it was just the cold playing tricks on him, thermal contraction in the steel, or maybe his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. But then it came again. 3 sharp, deliberate raps on the other side of the bulkhead. Ren jerked backward, nearly hitting the overhead. Tell me you heard that. I heard it. Her breathing was fast and shallow now, small bursts of air clouding the inside of her helmet. Marcus, it's impossible. That sound, it came from inside. He finished for her. They stared at the door, their helmet lamps casting twin cones of light over the scorched paint and the faintly glinting brass plate. The silence that followed was even worse than the knocking, like the whole submarine was holding its breath. Ren's voice crackled again, clipped and urgent. We have 6 minutes of bottom time before we have to start ascent. We log this. We come back with a full team. ROVs, cutting gear. No, Marcus said. If we leave now, that compartment will be sealed off by every intelligence agency that catches wind of this. We'll never get back inside. Ren swore under her breath. And you think the alternative is we open it, here, now? He didn't answer, because he knew she was right. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to leave. But there was something in those 3 knocks, something almost human, that refused to let him turn away. He clipped a tether line to a handhold, unclipped the small hydraulic spreader from his tool rig, and slid its prying jaws into the gap between door and frame. The steel groaned. Ren hissed in his ear. Marcus, your oxygen, I know. Just a crack, just a see. With a sharp pop, the mechanism gave way. A hiss of bubbles curled upward as a thin plume of water seeped out, dark with silt. Marcus shone his light into the gap. For an instant, he thought he saw movement. Not the slow, aimless drift of sediment, but a flicker, quick, purposeful sliding back into the shadows. Ren grabbed his arm. Enough. We're leaving. He hesitated a second longer, then sealed the spreader, letting the door fall shut. The latch clicked back into place, with a sound that made the hair rise on his neck. They made the ascent in silence, breaking the surface into the dim Arctic twilight. The support vessel, Ardent, loomed over them, her decks white with frost. As soon as they were on board, Marcus began pulling his helmet free, the smell of diesel and cold air rushing in. Ren didn't wait. She tore her own helmet off and rounded on him. What the hell was that? You heard it. Same as me. She shook her head, pacing the deck. There's no way. No way anything alive could be in there after 70 years. And yet, she stopped herself, biting off the words. The dive master came down from the wheelhouse, rubbing his gloved hands together. You're not going to like this. We had an encrypted transmission come in while you were under naval intelligence. They want our location data, dive logs, and every scrap of imagery. Now? Ren's eyes narrowed. How did they even know we were here? The dive master shrugged, said they were monitoring eyes, claimed this area's under restricted survey due to environmental sensitivity. Marcus knew that was nonsense. He also knew the Navy wouldn't have scrambled a real-time intercept for a 70-year-old wreck unless it was tied to something they never wanted found. He glanced toward the dive console. The video feed from his helmet cam was still looping grainy, flickering images of the Nereus's control room, the frozen crew, the welded hatch, and the 3 faint raps on the bulkhead. He reached down and killed the feed. Ren saw him do it. You're going to hide it. I'm going to make a copy before we hand anything over. The Ardent's engines rumbled as the captain brought her about, bow slicing through dark water toward the nearest port. Snow began to fall, fine white specks dissolving into the Black Sea. Ren leaned on the rail beside him. You know they're going to shut this down. The Nereus will be sealed under some NATO codeword file and disappear again. We'll be told to sign NDAs, pretend none of this happened. Marcus stared at the horizon, at the line where gray sky met black water. Then we make sure there's a record they can't erase. Behind them, inside the dive locker, the data drive from his helmet cam sat in a waterproof case alongside the small, palm-sized shard of metal with Cyrillic stenciling that he had quietly pried from the hull. The fragment's edges were scored with marks that looked less like battle damage and more like claw scratches. The Ardent made port in Isophyra under a sky the color of gunmetal, the wind carrying the bite of incoming snow. Marcus had been in enough sensitive recoveries to know what to expect, but even he was surprised by the efficiency of the team waiting on the dock. 4 men in heavy parkas, no visible rank or insignia, stood by a dark green truck with its engine idling. The tallest stepped forward as soon as the gangway clanged down. Dr. Hale, Commander Wren, you're to come with us immediately. Marcus glanced at Wren. She didn't move. And you are Naval Intelligence Liaison. That's all you need to know. The man's voice was calm, almost too calm, and his pale eyes didn't blink against the snow flurries. The captain of the Ardent came down behind them. These people have orders to impound all your dive footage, samples, and equipment. Port Authority's been told the same. Wren stepped forward. Our contract was with the Oceanic Heritage Foundation, not the Navy. You have no. The liaison cut her off with a paper folder. Inside was a printed directive stamped Eyes Only, Project Erebus. Wren's words died in her throat. She looked at Marcus, and he saw the same thing in her eyes. He was feeling cold recognition. Whatever was in that compartment wasn't just a relic of the Cold War. It was this Cold War, the one nobody ever officially admitted had never ended. They were driven inland to a squat, concrete building half buried in snowdrifts. Inside, the air smelled of oil and old coffee. They were taken down 2 flights of metal stairs into a windowless room that hummed faintly with the sound of ventilation. 3 people waited at the table. 2 men, 1 woman. Civilian clothes, but the sort of posture you only get from military careers. The woman spoke first. Dr. Hale, Commander Wren, you've both been involved in numerous historic wreck recoveries. You understand the protocols for classified material. Wren crossed her arms. I understand when something's being taken from the scientific community and buried in a vault. The woman didn't blink. What you found aboard the Nereus isn't a matter for the scientific community. It's a matter of strategic containment. Marcus kept his voice even. Strategic containment of what? One of the men slid a photograph across the table. Grainy, black and white, obviously old. It showed the Nereus's forward control room, but not as Marcus had seen it. The men at their posts were alive, their faces gaunt, eyes wide. And behind them, in the open doorway of that sealed compartment, something loomed. It was out of focus. It might have been a man in a heavy suit, or it might have been something else entirely. The proportions were wrong, arms too long, head tilted at an unnatural angle. The woman tapped the photo. This was recovered from Soviet intelligence archives in 1993. The file was part of a defector's data package. According to the attached notes, the Soviets intercepted a distress transmission from the Nereus hours before it went silent. They claimed the sub had retrieved a biological artifact from beneath Arctic ice. Wren frowned. Artifact? You're talking about a life form. Not in the way you think, the woman said. The term was theirs. We have no confirmation. Marcus leaned back, the knocking on the bulkhead. You've heard it before. None of them answered, but the silence was all the confirmation he needed. The other man at the table finally spoke. voice low. The Soviets weren't the only ones interested in what the Nereus found. Project Erebus was a joint US-Canadian operation to recover something from an ice fissure north of Jan Mayen. It went wrong. Very wrong. That's all you need to know. Wren glanced at Marcus, her expression tight. You've known exactly where she was all this time, haven't you? You could have recovered her decades ago. The woman's gaze didn't waver. Recovery wasn't the goal. Containment was. And you may have just compromised it. A door opened behind them. Another man entered, older, hair silver, face lined. He didn't sit. Dr. Hale, Commander Wren, as of now. You are both under a non-disclosure directive pursuant to Section 12 of the Strategic Security Act. You will surrender all recovered materials immediately, and you will not return to the wreck site. Marcus felt the waterproof case in his duffel, the weight of that metal fragment with its strange, clawed scoring. If they found it, it would vanish forever. The older man studied him. If you think you've kept anything back, I promise, you haven't we? We'll find it. Wren's jaw tightened. Then you already know we're not going to just forget what we saw. A faint smile crossed the man's face. That's where you're wrong, Commander. You will forget. One way or another. They were released without ceremony late the next afternoon. No explanations. No official paperwork, just escorted out of the building into the blinding white of a fresh Arctic snowfall. A dark van was waiting to drive them back to the Ardent. But Marcus didn't get in. He met Wren's eyes and gave the smallest shake of his head. The driver, a stone-faced petty officer, watched them for a moment before lighting a cigarette and turning away to talk to another sailor. That gave them 20 seconds. Marcus turned up his collar and stepped toward the row of maintenance sheds along the port road. Wren followed, boots crunching in the snow. Neither spoke until they were inside the shelter of a corrugated steel wall. They didn't search my bag, Marcus said, slipping the waterproof case out from under his coat. Wren's eyes widened. You still have it? He unlatched the case. Just enough for her to see the shard of metal, with Cyrillic stenciling. The claw-scored edges seemed to catch the dim light like wet bone. They wanted everything, Wren whispered. You know what happens if they figure out. They already know we're not playing along, Marcus said. The only question is whether we can get ahead of them. Wren blew out a breath that fogged in the cold air. Where do we even start? Marcus tapped the metal fragment. These markings aren't standard Soviet naval. They're from a research division Arkhangelsk station. Late 1940s. I've seen them in a declassified Canadian intelligence brief. If this came from inside the Nereus, then whatever was in that compartment was linked to Soviet defies expeditions. Wren frowned. And you think someone still cares enough to bury it 70 years later? I think someone still has it. They left the shed and walked to the main road, bypassing the van entirely. Marcus's plan was risky. Reach Reykjavik, find a secure network, and dig into Cold War Soviet archives that weren't supposed to exist anymore. The kind you only accessed through unofficial channels. 2 days later, in a rented flat above a seafood shop on Reykjavik's old harbor. Wren watched the snow whip against the windows, while Marcus hunched over a battered laptop. He had 3 different VPNs chained together, bouncing his signal through Helsinki, Riga, and finally into a forgotten Estonian server that hosted scanned Soviet naval logs. The connection was slow, the interface primitive. But then Marcus froze, his hand hovering over the trackpad. Found it, he murmured. Wren came around to look. On the screen was a digitized page from February 1952, Arkhangelsk Station's dispatch log. Most entries were routine, supply movements, weather reports. But one was marked with the classification stamp for non-terrestrial biological sample containment. Next to it was a notation, transferred to U.S. vessel under Operation Erebus, escorted by Red Banner Fleet until incident. Transmission cut. Wren read it twice, frowning deeper each time. Non-terrestrial, as in, not from Earth. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He clicked another link in annex of intercepted radio traffic from the Nereus. There were only fragments, most too garbled to understand. But one line, repeated, in English, was chillingly clear. Containment breached. It's moving. Wren felt the hairs rise on her arms. That's what they're still afraid of. Marcus leaned back, rubbing his eyes. If the Nereus was carrying something the Soviets believed wasn't even from Earth, and it got loose. A floorboard creaked in the hall outside. Both of them went still. Wren mouthed, "We didn't order food." Marcus slid the laptop shut, palmed the metal fragment, and reached for the diving knife he kept on the table. A shadow crossed the frosted glass of the front door. Then 3 sharp knocks evenly spaced. Wren's hand went to her sidearm. "Marcus." "That's the same pattern from the Nereus's bulkhead." The knocking stopped. The hallway outside was silent except for the low hum of the building's old radiators. Then, from somewhere, deep in the walls, came an answering knock. The sound inside the walls was not the hollow thud of pipes or settling wood. It was heavier, measured, like someone or something testing the space between them. Wren stepped back toward the kitchen, eyes sweeping for exits. Marcus moved to the window overlooking the alley, peeled back the curtain. A figure stood below, half shrouded by the drifting snow. No movement, no breath visible in the icy air. Wren mouthed, "How many?" Marcus gave a slight tilt of his head. He'd spotted at least 2 more, one across the street, another at the corner. The kind of static positioning you learned in surveillance training. But what unsettled him more was the stillness. They weren't fidgeting or scanning like human watchers. They were waiting. The knocking came again, this time from directly behind the wall to their left. Wren's pistol was already up. Marcus shook his head. "That's a load-bearing wall. No crawl space. No service conduit big enough for a person." Wren's gaze didn't waver. "Then it's not a person." The knocks grew louder, faster, rhythmic now, in a pattern Marcus recognized, but couldn't place. Something he'd seen in sonar patterns, maybe, no older than that. It made his stomach clench. A sudden sharp crack split the air glass, breaking. From the stairwell, the figure in the alley had moved, impossibly fast, and was now at the bottom of their door, hand on the knob. Wren grabbed Marcus's arm. "We move now." They hit the fire escape, boots clanging on iced steel. Below them, the alley was empty. The snow where the figure had stood was unbroken, no footprints, no drag marks. They ran 2 blocks before Marcus risked a glance back. The upper window of the flat was dark, but for an instant, just before he looked away, he thought he saw a pale shape pressed against the glass, head cocked at that unnatural angle he remembered from the Soviet photograph. They didn't stop until they reached the harbor. Marcus spotted an Icelandic Coast Guard cutter at berth, lines creaking in the swell. A crewman was locking down equipment for the night. Wren flashed her Navy credentials and spoke, in clipped, urgent Icelandic. The man hesitated, then nodded them aboard. Inside the cutter's cabin, heat from the diesel stove thawed the ice in Marcus's beard. Wren leaned close. "We can't stay on land. They'll box us in." Marcus unzipped the waterproof case and set the metal fragment on the table. Up close, the scoring looked less random, more like a deliberate pattern. Faint radial grooves, spread outward from a central point, almost like growth rings in wood, except each groove had microscopic notches along its length. Wren ran a gloved finger near knot on the surface. "You notice it's warmer than the cabin." He had noticed. Even after days in sub-zero air, the fragments seemed to hold a steady, faint heat. Marcus flipped open the laptop and reconnected through his chained VPN. His target now wasn't the Soviet log, but a Canadian Department of Defense archive he'd skimmed years ago. He searched Erebus, again this time filtering for cryptozoology, meteor events, and anomalous biology. One hit. A 1950 incident file, Arctic impact object, biological signatures detected, containment priority. The notes were sparse, but they mentioned an object of unknown origin recovered from an ice fissure during a joint U.S.-Canadian patrol. Biological residue not consistent with terrestrial taxonomy was recorded. That residue was sealed in a titanium containment capsule, later transferred to USS Nereus for transport to a facility in Maine. Wren exhaled slowly. So whatever's behind that welded bulkhead, it didn't start in the ocean. Marcus clicked the last page of the file. A single line of handwritten text had been scanned in. Containment breach will manifest as coordinated knocking. Do not answer. Before either could speak, the cutter's radio crackled to life in Icelandic, then switched mid-sentence to perfect English. Dr. Hale, Commander Wren, you've been located. Surrender the fragment. This is your only warning. The voice was calm. To calm. Wren killed the radio, but the cabin phone rang immediately. The sound, sharp and alien in the confined space. 3 knocks, perfectly spaced, echoed through the hull. The knocks reverberated through the cutter's steel shell, deep, resonant, like someone striking the hull from inside the waterline. The crewman who had let them aboard froze mid-step, eyes darting toward the sound. He muttered something under his breath in Icelandic and crossed himself. Marcus and Wren locked eyes. Neither spoke, but both knew that sound didn't belong in open harbor. The cutter's captain appeared in the doorway, pulling on a heavy coat. We're leaving port, now. His voice was clipped, no room for debate. Whatever's knocking, I want it away from my hull. Within minutes, the lines were cast off. The engines rumbled, and the cutter pushed into the open fjord. Snow whipped across the deck, the town's lights shrinking to pinpricks behind them. Wren stood at the stern, scanning the black water for any sign of movement. They're not going to let us get far. Marcus came up beside her, the metal fragment in one hand. Even through his glove, it radiated faint heat. He turned it over, studying the radial grooves again. In certain light, the microscopic notches caught and refracted, like they were directing something. Sound, maybe. You hear it? Wren asked quietly. At first he thought she meant the wind, but then he caught it, a low rhythmic pulse beneath the engine noise. Not the knocks they'd stopped, but a steady beat, slow and deliberate, almost like sonar. Marcus ducked into the cabin and pulled up the ship's sonar display. The screen showed nothing unusual at first, just the scatter of undersea ridges and the occasional ice flow. Then, at the very edge of range, a single contact appeared. It wasn't moving like a submarine. It was pacing them. The captain came over, frowning at the readout. Could be an iceberg. No, Marcus said. It's adjusting depth to match us. The captain looked at him sharply, then at Wren. If you brought something onto my vessel before, he could finish. The sonar ping spiked, blooming into a jagged mass on the screen. The hull shuddered. A hollow boom rang up through the deck plates, followed by a scraping sound that set Marcus's teeth on edge. Wren grabbed the fragment from his hand and pressed it against the bulkhead. The pulsing in the water stopped instantly. The scraping sound faded. What the hell did you just do? Marcus asked. I don't know, she admitted, but it reacted. The captain barked orders in Icelandic, turning the cutter north toward open sea. We'll lose it in the ice fields. Whatever it is. Hours later, the fjord gave way to rolling black swells and drifting ice. The temperature dropped until even their breath seemed to freeze in the air. The contact on sonar lingered, then faded, but Marcus had the uneasy sense that fading didn't mean gone. Wren came into the cabin carrying 2 mugs of coffee. You ever read the original Erebus mission summary? She asked. I've seen the redacted version. This isn't in that. Back at the flat in Reykjavik, when you pulled up the Canadian file, I saw a reference note. Something about Phase 2, never initiated because containment was lost. She handed him a folded scrap of paper. It was a photocopy of a handwritten notation. Phase 2. Transfer biological intelligence to defies facility, Jan Mayen sector. Do not expose to open sea. Responds to patterned acoustic signals. Marcus's stomach tightened. Patterned acoustic signals. Like knocking, Ren nodded. And like sonar, the fragment in Marcus's pocket felt warmer now, as though it had been lying in sunlight. The cutter pushed deeper into the ice, weaving between floes that loomed like pale cliffs. The radio was silent. The crew spoke little. Then the knocking started again, this time from directly beneath them. It was faster now, urgent. The sonar operator shouted something in Icelandic. Marcus leaned over the display and felt the blood drain from his face. The contact had returned, closer, and this time, it wasn't alone. 3 distinct pings, all circling the cutter dot. Ren set down her coffee, without looking away from the screen. Marcus, I think whatever was in the Nereus didn't die. I think it bred. The first impact hit aft, low, shoving the cutter sideways into a jagged wall of ice. The hull groaned, steel straining against the frozen edge. Crew shouted, boots pounding on the deck overhead. Ren steadied herself against the chart table. They're hurting us. Marcus's eyes stayed on the sonar. The 3 pings tightened their circle, methodical, almost mechanical except for the erratic darting of one, moving faster than the others. Testing the perimeter. Another boom, this time at the bow. The captain swore in Icelandic and shoved the throttles forward. The cutter's diesels roared, churning black water into a froth as they lunged between ice floes. Marcus gripped the table. If they're reacting to sound patterns, maybe we can. Ren was already moving, yanking open the storage locker and pulling out the emergency signal gun. She slammed the butt against the steel bulkhead in a rapid sequence. 2 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause, 1. The sonar lit up instantly. All 3 contacts stopped moving. Tell me that's good, Marcus said. Ren's face was pale. Or they're just listening. The cutter surged through a narrow channel between ice floes. In the pale glow of the deck lights, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement beneath the water, something long and sinuous, gliding with an ease no submarine could match. Segmented plates flashed silver, then vanished into the black. The captain's voice came over the loudspeaker. 10 minutes to Jan Mayen ice shelf. Marcus blinked. You're taking us toward it. Only deep water refuge this side of the gap, the captain snapped. And maybe you too can explain why whatever's under us won't cross it. Ren's head turned sharply. What do you mean? He jerked a thumb toward the bridge. Local charts mark an old restricted zone in the shelf off limits since the 50s. Officially unstable ice. Unofficially he trailed off, muttering something in Icelandic that Marcus didn't catch. The sonar operator shouted again. 1 contact had broken from the circle and was accelerating straight toward them. It hit amidships hard. The deck tilted. Ren grabbed the rail. Marcus slammed into the wall. The sound of twisting metal filled the cabin. Then came a new noise, high-pitched, warbling, almost like whale song, but wrong. It vibrated in Marcus's teeth. The fragment in his pocket grew hot enough to sting. Ren's eyes widened. It's calling the others. The sonar bloomed with movement. 3 contacts became 5, then 6, converging from all directions. The channel ahead narrowed to a wall of ice. The captain didn't slow. The cutter's reinforced bow slammed into the edge, shattering slabs into the air. Spray and ice rained down, freezing instantly on the deck. For a moment, there was open water ahead, dark, glassy, unnaturally still. Ren stared at it. That's not just open sea. That's the fissure. Marcus's stomach twisted. The Erebus sight, the hot weight in his pocket seemed to pulse. And beneath the hull, the knocking returned only. Now it came from both sides, closing in. The captain shouted over the wind. You want answers? They're down there. Ren's gaze met Marcus's. She didn't have to say it. They both knew that if they went into that fissure, they might not come back. But if they didn't, Whatever had survived from the Nereus would keep following, and maybe. Breathing. Marcus pulled the fragment from his pocket and held it over the water. The knocks stopped instantly. The stillness was absolute. Ren's voice was barely audible over the wind. It's waiting. The fissure yawned beneath them like a wound in the ice-black water, swallowing the deck lights as if it had no bottom. The surface was too still for the Arctic, unnaturally smooth, as though the wind itself avoided it. The captain killed the engines. The cutter drifted into the mouth of the channel, the ice walls rising on either side like the walls of a canyon. The air grew heavy, damp, tasting faintly of metal. Ren leaned over the rail, her breath fogging in the cold. This is wrong. The water's warm. Marcus felt it too, a subtle change in the air, like standing near an open engine hatch. He pulled the fragment from his pocket. Heat radiated off it now, far stronger than before. The radial grooves seemed to shimmer faintly in the half-light. The captain joined them, voice low. When I was a boy, my father fished these waters. Told me never to sail near Jan Mayen's northern shelf. Said the Navy used to run patrols here, not to keep people out, but to keep something in. Ren gave Marcus a sidelong glance. Project Erebus. A faint vibration rippled through the deck. It was not the deep thunk of the knocks. This was lighter, constant like a hum. Marcus realized it was coming from below. The sonar operator's voice crackled from the bridge. Multiple returns. Depth indeterminate. Ren's jaw tightened. We need to see it. Marcus nodded. Suit up. The cutter's dive locker was cramped, but the crew helped them into thermal dry suits and helmet rigs. The captain refused to send more than one crewman down with them, a wiry Icelandic diver named Jonis, who said nothing, just checked their gear with quick, precise movements. They dropped into the fissure's mouth, the water closing over them with surprising warmth. Visibility was better than Marcus expected, 10, maybe 12 meters in the faint green light. The ice walls plunged straight down, smooth as glass in places, rippled like melted wax in others. At 20 meters, the hum grew stronger, resonating in their chests. At 40 meters, the ice walls gave way to rock-black basalt formations, riddled with narrow tunnels. Something had carved through them, long ago. The shapes weren't random. The curves and angles reminded Marcus of the notches on the fragment, scaled up 100-fold. Ren's voice came over comms, hushed, despite the helmet mic. Marcus, are you seeing this? He was in the silt. At the base of one rock face lay a rusted steel plate, stenciled with faint white letters. SS 414A. Piece of the Nereus. Jonas's light swung to the right and froze. Out of the darkness beyond the wreckage came movement. Slow, deliberate. At first Marcus thought it was a man in an ancient deep-sea suit, the kind with a heavy dome helmet. Then it moved closer, and he saw the helmet was no helmet at all. It was part of the thing's body, a translucent carapace shot through with pale, glowing lines that pulsed in time with the hum. It reached out a limb, not an arm, not exactly, but jointed like one end, touched the steel plate. The glow along its carapace flared. The hum stopped. In the sudden silence, something else began, a pattern of sharp, precise knocks that vibrated through the rock itself. Marcus felt them in his bones. Ren's breathing quickened. It's signaling. The knocks were answered from deeper in the fissure. Then, from the black beyond the ice, more shapes emerged. 3, 4. Joni swore in Icelandic, his light jerking wildly. The creatures surrounded them at a distance, their pale carapaces reflecting faintly in the beams. None moved closer. They were waiting. The fragment in Marcus's hand began to vibrate. The notches along its grooves lit faintly, one after the other. In the same sequence as the knocks, Ren's voice came through, tight. Marcus, I think it wants us to follow. He looked into the darkness beyond the basalt tunnel. The glow of the creatures shifted, forming a loose corridor into the deep. Behind them, the ice above ground a reminder that turning back might not be possible. Marcus closed his hand around the fragment. We go. They moved into the basalt tunnel, the glow of the creatures ahead guiding them deeper. The walls narrowed, the ice overhead giving way entirely to black stone. The water temperature rose another few degrees. It felt almost tropical compared to the Arctic above. Marcus glanced back once. The fissure mouth was gone, swallowed by the dark. The creatures behind them, 5 at least, drifted silently, keeping perfect formation. Ren's voice was hushed, though the comm system carried every syllable clearly. It's like an escort, or a guard. Marcus adjusted the fragment in his grip. The faint light running along the grooves pulsed in time with the creature's movements. As if syncing to some unseen signal, they emerged into a vast cavern. The ceiling was lost in shadow, but the floor was littered with wreckage pieces of steel hulls, twisted frames, even what looked like the remains of an aircraft fuselage. All bore the scars of deep corrosion and something else, the same clawed scoring as the fragment. Joni swept his light across the cavern floor and froze. Weta ar amgulegd, impossible. Resting in the silt, perfectly upright, was the forward section of the Nereus. Not just a fragment, the whole bow from the sail forward, somehow torn clean from the rest of the submarine. Its forward hatch, the one Marcus had seen welded from the outside, was open. Ren's voice dropped. 70 years, and it's still here. They swam closer. The open hatch gaped like a mouth. Inside, the corridor was choked with silt, but faint trails wound through it, as if something had passed in and out countless times. Marcus's helmet light caught something half buried just inside the threshold. A helmet cam. Navy issue. 1950s. He reached for it, and the creatures reacted, instantly closing in a few meters. Their glowing lines brightening. Ren lifted her free hand slowly. Easy, we're not taking it. Marcus let his fingers brush the helmet cam, just enough to free it from the silt. As it drifted upward, a shadow moved within the hatch. It was one of them, but smaller. The carapace was translucent, like the others, but its glow was weak, erratic. Its limbs moved with a trembling, almost hesitant rhythm. Ren inhaled sharply. A juvenile. The larger creatures fanned out, forming a wall between the humans and the hatch. The juvenile retreated into the shadows, and the knocks began again. Now, deliberate. Jonas's voice cracked over comms. They're telling us something. Marcus held up the fragment. The knocks stopped. Then, from deep in the cavern, another sound began, a steady, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate the very water. The creatures turned as one and began moving toward the source. The largest paused, looking back if the term even applied, extended one long jointed limb toward Marcus. The tip touched the fragment in his hand. For an instant, a flood of images burst in his mind, flashes of the ice shelf, the Nereus's control room, men screaming as bulkheads buckled, and something moving in the dark water outside. Not attacking. Calling. The images shifted, glimpses of stars, of a burning object, tearing through an atmosphere not like Earth's, and then ice closing over it, in silence. Marcus staggered in the water, the connection breaking. Ren grabbed his arm. Marcus, what happened? He caught his breath. It's not just an animal. It's intelligent. And whatever it is, it's not from here. The hum deepened, shaking the cavern. Somewhere far below, something massive was rising. Voice was tight. I think we're about to meet the reason Project Erebus existed. The hum became a roar, not in volume but in pressure, pressing against their skulls, vibrating their ribs, making every instinct scream to flee. From the darkness below, a shape emerged, and for a moment Marcus's brain refused to assemble. It didn't do anything comprehensible. It was vast, larger than the Nereus, its form segmented like the others, but on a scale that bent perspective. Plates of translucent armor shifted and retracted in slow, deliberate motions, revealing inner structures that pulsed with a deep amber light. its limbs stiff. They were limbs moved with the weight of something that had never needed to hurry. The smaller creatures fanned out around it, their glow dimming as if in deference. Ren's voice was barely a whisper in the comms. Mother, or something worse. Marcus clutched the fragment tighter. The notches along its grooves were lit now, all at once, the heat almost painful through his glove. The massive creature turned toward him, and then, without warning, the world inside his mind shifted. He was no longer in the water. He was standing on the deck of the Nereus, watching sailors in heavy coats, hammering the forward bulkhead shut. Their faces were pale with fear, not of what was inside, but of what was outside. Pressing against the hull in rhythmic knocks, the scene jumped. Soviet officers in a frostbitten tent, staring at a block of ice the size of a truck, encased in steel plating. Inside the ice, something glowed faintly. Then another jumped to a conference room in Washington, maps of the Arctic spread across the table. Two men shaking hands. One says, "We can't kill it. We can only contain it." The vision dissolved into an image of the ice fissure, decades earlier, still sealed over. The massive creature, this creature lying motionless beneath, surrounded by others. Waiting, Marcus gasped, the connection breaking. The amber light in the creature's core dimmed slightly, as if it had given him what it came to give. Ren's voice cut in, urgent. "Marcus." The ice above Usit's shifting. He looked up. The faint light from the fissure mouth was dancing wildly as slabs cracked and tilted. The sound was muffled, but unmistakable. Distant explosives. Jonis swore in Icelandic. "They're collapsing it. Whoever's up there, they're trying to bury this whole place." Marcus's mind raced. If they bring the ice down, these things will be trapped again, but so will we. The largest creature moved closer, extending a limb toward the fragment. Slowly, carefully, Marcus let it go. The limb closed around it with a delicacy that seemed impossible for something so huge. The knocks began again, not on rock or steel this time, but in the water itself, waves of pressure rolling outward. Ren's eyes widened. "It's telling the others to leave." And they did. The smaller creatures began retreating into side tunnels, vanishing into the black. The massive one lingered a moment longer, the amber glow in its body flickered once, twice before it turned and slid down into the depths, fragment in tow. The hum faded dot above. The fissure walls groaned. A jagged spear of ice broke free and tumbled past, missing Marcus by meters. The light from above narrowed as more slabs shifted. "Move," Ren shouted. They kicked hard for the surface, the water around them filling with shards of falling ice. The glow of the cavern faded into cold green, then into the pale blue of daylight. Just before they burst through the surface into chaos, the cutter's crew hauled them aboard. The captain's face was grim. Charges went off early. "We have to get clear." As they sped from the fissure, Marcus looked back. The opening was collapsing in slow motion, ice grinding against ice until the last trace of black water was gone. Ren stood beside him, dripping eyes fixed on the spot where the fissure had been. "Do you think it'll stay down there?" Marcus shook his head. "No, I think it let us go." She studied him for a long moment. Why? He didn't answer, because he wasn't sure. But somewhere in the back of his mind, under the roar of the engines and the howl of the wind, he thought, he could still feel the faint pulse of knocks carried, not through steel or water, but through memory, and he knew they weren't done.